It's an incredible thing to feel completely empty. In what has been an undeniably tough year that's hitting yet another period set to be so stressful even women will have Alan Wynne-Jones's hairline, Wales' national rugby team gave their countryfolk a great big dose of nothing by putting in a pointless performance against a Scotland side who only had to be very competent, which, in keeping with other themes from the year, they were. This isn't to take anything away from the Scots, because after all, this was not an upset. This was a team who was not better than Wales a year ago, proving that they are now better than Wales by beating them in a reasonably robust manner away from home for the first time since 2002. The likes of Ali Price and Jamie Ritchie were sublime as Scotland saw out a match played in Parker Scarlets with more indecipherable wind than Clive Woodward talking in tongues. It wasn't so much that Wales played badly as they didn't play at all. This was a side who didn't fire a shot. Now, stats can be contorted to tell you anything, but there aren't many ways of reading the simple statistic that Wales made just 191 metres with the ball in hand on Saturday. Now, for some context, only twice 371 match history of the Rugby World Cup has a team failed to make 200 metres as Wales did on Saturday. This was the lowest meterage, as far as I could find, of any side in the last decade in the Six Nations, and that includes Italy in games where they got spanked. And yet this doesn't have to be damning. Wales had a similarly low meterage count against the Springboks last year in the semi-final of the World Cup, but they kicked well and dominated territory. That was just the result of tactics. Since Pivac took over, Wales' clear plan B, if things cease to work, and we'll get onto that, is always to hang the ball in the air to chase. And yet, only really 2 of those kicks across the whole 80 minutes were any good or put any pressure on the opposition. The conditions on Saturday were so mad you'd wonder whether it was really the wind or a Jedi on the touchline doing jazz hands, and yet Wales continued to persist with bombs no matter how far they got blown off course, unsure what the plan B for their plan B would be. Meanwhile, Scotland, in particular Stuart Hogg, would just drill low kicks, giving them less chance of being caught on the wind. You can make an argument for the Wales team not having extra structures in place to back up their plan B, but at the end of the day, one side had players able and willing to adapt to the conditions, the other did not. The side that had those players won the rugby match. And it didn't help that Wales was so reliant on that plan B as they found themselves completely shut down by the best defence in this year's Six Nations, which wonderfully gives me a chance to come full circle on this channel and absolutely celebrate the job being done by Bridgen's own Moody Statham and subject to the first ever Squidge Rugby video, Steve Tandy. Now, Steve Tandy's defence is built on safety. It's not high risk, high reward as per Sean Edwards or John Mitchell systems. Think of an umbrella defence if the handle attacked you. The first pocket of defenders rush up incredibly hard on the first receiver. Both Wales and France like to use this very space, this first receiver here, to get a good carry before looking wide, or whilst other players from the team are finding their shape whilst they're getting into their system. And in both matches, Scotland shut that down. When those carries are either going backwards or being attacked time after time by turnover threat, forcing more men in or losing the ball, it's hard to retain the ball, never mind to launch any kind of attack. Because Wales are only really using carries like this to get everyone else into position, often other players were too busy getting in position, and Scotland could sneak in either the Mish or Jamie Ritchie to get over the ball. Throw in a couple of additional cute pieces of play like this from Blade Thompson, just nudging James Davis away to buy Ritchie a split second he needs to get over the ball, and suddenly Wales are losing 10% of their own total rucks, an almost unheard of number in Test rugby. As for the backs, their job is far more straightforward. It's pretty old school. They drift up and read the play. To show how they do it, let's look at a moment that easily could have been Wales' best chance of the game, and yet it was made to look like nothing. You've probably forgotten it happened. After a great break by Josh Adams, who had a quietly really good game, the kind of game you wouldn't notice if you were watching it thinking of the result, Scotland's defence floods back very quickly. Lang is able to make a huge nuisance of himself at the breakdown, and that's enough to buy Scotland the mere second it takes to get them back in line. The ball comes out, and it looks like an easy overlap for Wales at first, especially with no fullback, no cover at home. However, played on second, and suddenly Dan Biggar's picture has changed almost entirely. Harris has cut down his time and removed the option to kick. He doesn't have time to do that. Hastings has now cut off the miss pass to Ivor Davis, and Kinghorn would cover Williams if he tries to throw it super wide. Bigger has to go himself, he has no other choice, and he loses the ball in contact. The only time Wales did manage to burrow through resulted in the eventual try for Rhys Carre, but it wasn't smooth sailing at all. Wales repeatedly tried to run this move off the line out, James Davis passing to Watkin, who crashes it up. They ran this a number of times during the first half of the Six Nations with Tipperick or Faletau and Parks, and it was frankly far more successful because the back row forward actually looked to engage the line, forcing tacklers to brace for impact on Faletau or Tipperick. Davis, however, is visibly assessing his options, and the defence isn't expecting a full-strength carry. Watkin makes a decent carry considering, and Wales bring forward round the corner to, again, carry. I've written that word too many times here. However, here, the Welsh shape isn't set yet. Players are still jogging into position. Dan Biggar doesn't want it. Quick ball has been generated, and Gareth Davis has picked it up. He then has to ship it onto Faletau. It's a poor pass, but this is Talupe bloody Faletau we're talking about. So obviously, he nonchalantly scoops it off his toes and dinks a perfect kick into the corner. Scotland overthrow the line out, and Wales try to grind over the final few inches, with an encouraging number of Exeter-styled tricks in the mix. Over clearing out a rucks to free up space, and then the finish by Carey is quite quietly impressive. He notices Watson has got super low to stop him burrowing under, but instead bumps his shoulder on Watson's shoulder to prevent the Mish making any kind of tackle, and it allows him to just fall over the line next to the freshly off-balance Mish. Wales' attack, to talk about that, is essentially a big twist on the 1-3-2-2 system I outlined Ireland used last week, but where the backs and forwards are able to be interchangeable. It's more ornate. There's more room for passing and offloading. They got it working once in this game, just once, after some positive phase play. This carry by Carey gets them into shape, and then we see Owen Watkins slot in flat, selecting from genuine options. Alun Jones carries forward, and then Watkins slots in again, where he has even more options, including Dan Biggar. Before eventually carries in, he then slides in again at 10, spots some space, and slides in quite a nice kick to pin Scotland back. When effective, it is going to break defences down, but it only seems to click properly once, maybe twice a game. This team will get better at using it the longer they're playing in a style, but it's hard to be too optimistic when they're 6 games in and the same teething problems have only got worse and more pronounced game on game. The Scarlets also took quite a long time to click with Pivac's system. For the first 2 and a bit years of his tenure, before they became title contenders, the Scarlets were a mid-table side who occasionally scored some nice tries but ultimately tripped over their own shoelaces at key moments. By my count, it took the Scarlets about 62 games of playing this way for it to finally click and find the kind of form and momentum that took them to a league title. Between 2015 and the 2019 World Cup, Wales played 46 games, and it's probably going to be even lower this year, what with that COVID and all of that. Maybe it's unreasonable to expect things to be perfect in the first few games. I think that's fair. But Australia and Ireland are both playing quite similar but less frilly variations of the same system under new coaching teams, and even counting this weekend's results for both of them, both look so much better. Because instead of slowly transitioning, Pivac has attempted to rip up everything Gatland did, and in the process has transformed them from one of the top 4 teams in the world, a side Rassie Erasmus considered the most difficult he'd ever coached against, into a mid-table team who occasionally play some nice rugby but ultimately trip over their own shoelaces at the key moments. It's in the Welsh blood to panic and say, this is the end of Cymru as a tier 1 nation, this is the end of rugby in Wales as we know it, but let's be a bit more level-headed. Wales are definitely building something. It's just worrying how long it's taking them to put down the foundations. However, that's enough self-indulgent flapdoodlery about Wales. Scotland might not have been at their best on Saturday, but they played the slightly rubbishy game in front of them superbly. Ali Price has always been very good, very lively as a scrum half, but I'm not sure I've ever seen him just boss a game better than this. It's hard to argue with Jamie Ritchie taking it, but if you'd ask me who was my man of the match on Saturday, I'd have to say that's Ali Price. This quick tap, with the game grinding to a standstill, genuinely changes things. Scotland suddenly have a liveliness and energy about them. Price keeps that pace up for a number of phases, and then is unafraid to stab it down into the Welsh 22, putting Patchell under pressure and forcing Halfpenny to clear from an awkward position into the wind. This eventually leads to a penalty, which eventually leads to the line-out, which leads to the maul, which leads to the try for Stuart McInally. Back to Price, and with the wind dying down, this box kick is fantastic, pulling Halfpenny up to the absolute edge of where he can cover and putting him under huge pressure. And it would have resulted in Scotland regaining the ball if it had not been for a moment of fantastic skill by Halfpenny to bat it backwards. And this dink into the corner just traps Wales on their own line, and then a few minutes later, with the clock having been suitably run down, he just does it again, leaving Wales convinced 3 minutes isn't long enough and trying to run it from 80 metres. Scotland, however, looked far more like it when they played running rugby. Here, as Hogg catches the ball, Xander Fagerson turns and deliberately bumps into Shane Lewis-Hughes. This prevents Lewis Hughes getting across to make the initial tackle. But Fagerson does it so early, he makes his block so early, the referee's never going to call it as obstruction. Instead, it just results in a disjointed Wales line, and they're still recovering as Hastings catches the ball a phase later, forcing Davis to overdrift, just trusting the men inside him. Hastings darts into 22, through and past tackles, and Scotland continue to play with pace and variation. It feels slightly unfair to spend more time talking about Wales and Scotland in this video, and I'm sorry that I have, but it's because it was a game won by common sense and competency. It's easy to point to something and say why it's wrong, but Scotland were just doing the right things quietly for 80 straight minutes. There were no brain farts or tactical implosions, no backfires or blow-ups, just a team doing what they had to win. It wasn't so much one for the purists as one for people that love not straight lineouts, but this was a long coming and very deserved win for Scotland. They now head into the Autumn Nations Cup with a quiet optimism that they can push for the top end of the tournament, and even the one enormous downer from this game, seeing both of their fantastic test match 10s go off injured, only means
here comes the money. Here comes the money. Money, 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 money. Money, 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 money.
the one and only Donkey Weir is in line to guide Scotland through the competition in his typically magnificent necklace manner. And as for the Wales, they'll be hoping they can finally click. They can finally make the system work, and that they can finally make their nation feel slightly less empty. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry it's a bit late. I've been working on a video for the Bledisloe Cup game between the All Blacks and the Wallabies. However, the videos on the first two tests that I made were taken down from YouTube by Sanzar, who I've contacted. I haven't heard anything back from yet. I've tried to speak to them quite directly. It would be great if I could kind of sort this out so I could cover the Rugby Championship, because I'd love to, which started last week. However, that kind of threw me off course a bit because I'd done a lot of work on that and I couldn't finish it and couldn't put it out. So I've only just got around to moving on to finally the Six Nations. Plus I spent a lot of the last few days just staring at election results, as I'm sure many people are familiar with. So I'm moving on to England, Italy and Ireland, France next. I'll try and get those up before the first round of the Autumn Nations Cup, which starts on Friday. In the meantime, I've got loads of other stuff. So I've got stuff I'm doing the World Rugby channel. I've got the podcast on the 2011 Rugby World Cup, going through every single game. I've got a new episode on Argentina-Scotland, which is one of the best games of the tournament. Amorosino scoring that brilliant late try. There's loads of other stuff going on. If you want to have a look at all the videos on the previous Six Nations games, please have a look. Please, I hope you enjoyed them. And I will see you very soon for one of the other Six Nations games.
Money, 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 money.